everybody. Welcome back to the Everyday Night. I'm Joe.
And I'm Jeff.
And Jeff, I think we should talk about the collected wit and wisdom of Pee Wee Herman.
Oh, well, that's an excellent subject. I wonder, if we, at some point, I don't think we want to do that tonight. I think there are other more topical things, but I think there may be a point where we could say, how does Pee Wee Herman demonstrate the virtues? Pee Wee Herman, the show. The Pee Wee Herman show.
And actually, he did. I think. I think SpongeBob does too.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, Pee Wee's no Ishkabibble, but
Well, but who is?
But who is really? So
no, I thought tonight we should talk about something that's very much in the news lately. And we want to talk about it, of course, as we always do, in light of the virtues. And it's about education and the responsibilities surrounding education. One's own education, the education system, all that. You are actually in the education system.
I am. This is the first week of the semester, and it's been challenging, but the challenge has not been the students or the content. The challenge has been
administration.
Yes.
Always about the administration.
Yes. Yeah. So
those that can teach, those that can do, those that can't teach, and those that can't teach administrate.
Well, yes, except I've never agreed with that. I think those who can do and those who can do well have an obligation to teach.
I agree. I think
but they're different skills. Doing and teaching are different skills.
Yes. And I think it's mostly applied to sports. I think that saying comes from sports, that if you are not physically able to be a professional athlete, you can teach professional athletes. Because I mean, there are very few
player coaches. Yeah, there were a few, and they didn't always do well.
Right.
And people who direct themselves in film, similarly, there's some who do it well, and but it's everyone who's done that says it's really challenging to do both well at the same time.
Yeah, well, at the same time, certainly. I mean, yeah. I've seen great actors be great directors.
Yes,
but occasionally trying to direct and star in a film has proved to be too much for them.
Yeah, it's probably the only way they can get funding initially.
Oh, well, so maybe could be.
But anyway, before we begin, perhaps have you some tasty libation this evening?
In fact, I do. It's a sort of an odd little it is a pre-mixed old fashioned with salted maple flavor.
Wow. Okay.
It's 73 proof, so it's not like super alcoholic, but it's very nice for sipping just by itself. It's an old fashioned, so it's sweet.
Yeah.
The maple goes well with all the other flavors, and there's a little, I don't really get the salted maple flavor the way I would get like a salted caramel.
Yeah, it can work together. The sweet and salty can work together in the right balance. Certainly. In the right situation. Yeah,
certainly. But I'm just not tasting much of that salty savor balancing the sweet. It's mostly just sweet. So, and what do you have?
Well, I have a glass of Primitivo from Puglia in Italy. Primitivo, interestingly, is the same grape as Zinfandel in the United States.
Okay.
But it's from Zinfandel vines, but it's called Primitivo. But because of the subject we're talking about tonight, it's in this glass that I was gifted. It says it's in the fucking syllabus, dumbass.
Very good.
Yeah, because the friends who gave this to me heard me say on more than one occasion, it's in the syllabus, you know.
Right.
So here's
Okay,
to
Eric.
education in my semi-visible class.
Right. Well, education, I think this is a good thing to talk about, because education really is the basis, forms the basis of our society, right?
Yes.
So
Well,
society then, I should think, has some obligation to educate its population.
in fact, laws had to be passed. Compulsory education laws had to be passed because children were considered labor and were not being educated. Right. And unfortunately, I have seen some reactionary politicians suggesting that we should get rid of compulsory education laws and it should be entirely up to the parents to decide what and even whether their children are educated.
Well, of course, because they're not interested in, they're interested in a ignorant and malleable society.
Exactly. And there has been, I have concluded, a concerted attack for decades on public education.
Yeah, that's an important subject to me. I'm
yes,
very passionate about the idea of public versus private education.
Yes. And someone was asked, I don't remember who it was who responded with this, was asked, said, you don't have any children, why do you support public education, taxes to support public education? He said, because I want to live in a society with educated people, because right. That's a better society. And
not
I
being
agree.
Surrounded by ignoramuses.
And look at the problems socially, politically we have from people who are easily led, easily duped by people with nefarious intent. Mm-hmm. And one of the, there's several things that I wish were still taught, including logic, rhetoric. Mm-hmm. Because the any given evening I could watch the news or see commentators on television or politicians and count the number of logical fallacies,
right?
Ad hominem attack, straw man fallacy, slippery slope fallacy. They're just rampant, and people don't question that.
Well, and we've substituted editorialization for news in a lot of our media.
It has been packaged in such a way to blur the line between them, and that's unfortunate.
Well, I heard somebody actually, I think it was Jon Stewart, in an older interview with Chris Wallace, I believe, talking about how before Chris Wallace left Fox News, Chris Wallace was kind of trying to defend Fox News as a news organization. And Jon Stewart was talking about how Fox News was kind of the first to do it and figured out the format and the business model, but they were designed for 9/11, where people were worried and afraid and wanted constant updates and information about what was going on nationally and in New York right around 9/11. So the 24/7 news cycle was kind of invented for 9/11. And when 9/11 was sort of over or became less newsworthy, that 24/7 news model had to start manufacturing panic.
Right. Yeah, there's I've forgotten the name of the book, but it's about Um, it's about, there's a study of how people will use crisis situations, either real or manufactured, to gain control.
Yes.
And
Yeah. Well, that's throughout history.
yes. So I think the first point, the first virtue that for me is essential when talking about education, and again, whether the education is something you are getting in the education system, whether it's your continuing self-education, which when you consider the low percentage of people who read a book after school, or
Right.
read a book, and the low number of adults who read a book in the past year, it's disturbing. But the first thing that comes to mind is veritas, honesty.
Mm-hmm.
And it's honesty both in it's honesty in all the meanings. It's truthfulness about what you say, being honest. It's honesty in what people are telling you. It's honesty in your judgment. It's honesty to yourself. All of those things. And when that's violated, the education suffers.
Right.
And there
Well, and it
are,
undermines trust, which is what
yeah,
we have now.
exactly. And there are nearly constant assaults on what educators can teach and how they can teach it. There's a great book I recommend to people called Lies My Teacher Told Me, which is quite a few years old now, but it was an examination of the most widely used history textbooks in high schools in the country and how they were factually incorrect because they were controlled. It was largely the influence of the Texas School Board.
Right.
Because they operated with a political agenda. There was one dentist on the Texas School Board who said, we have to stop listening to these experts.
Right. Yeah.
And there's been a dishonest attempt to undermine expertise.
Right. Well, I mean, if you listen to someone who's actually an expert, then a politician can't warp your understanding of something.
Right. So why listen to, well, first of all, I in a discussion online, I posted references of peer-reviewed studies from credible academic journals. And the response from one person was, oh, those are the worst. You can't trust peer-reviewed studies. and I said, we have no basis for discussion.
Yeah.
If you won't accept that. And there are people who won't, well, obviously people who won't take vaccines, but will take horse dewormer, bleach, hydroxychloroquine, and the latest thing is urine therapy, drinking your own urine.
Oh my God, that's been a thing for 1,000 years.
I know.
And there's no study to support that it does anything at all.
No, I'm sure it does something, but nothing good. But yeah, so it's dishonest to the Dunning-Kruger syndrome, right? The less you know, the more you think you actually know. And it's a violation of the virtue of honesty to elevate your own lack of expertise beyond that of people who actually know what the fuck they're talking about.
Right. Well, and humility.
Yes.
Right?
Lack
to
of humility.
That you're not an expert.
Yes.
And to give over your opinion is just that. It's just an opinion. There are someone who's made an actual life study of the subject you're talking about has a right to an opinion. If you have not, you have an opinion. You can have an opinion about what they think, but you can't attack what they know.
Yes, because they have a conclusion
Right.
based on data. You only have an opinion.
And based on
And
feelings and
yes,
truthiness
and everybody's entitled to their opinion,
and how
but
they feel about something.
right. But that doesn't mean it's accurate as a conclusion based on data. And so
Right.
I always make a distinction between an opinion and a conclusion.
Right. Sure.
And yeah,
And humility is what requires you to recognize the difference in conversation.
yes,
Of
because an expert has prowess in their field.
yes, I think
So,
we could say that.
yes. So the education system has been under attack, concerted attack, and it got worse. Well, it certainly started actually a long time ago. But I recall when Sputnik went up, there was a concerted in the late 60s, late 50s. Yeah.
Late 60s, we were on the moon.
No, I said early 60s, but late 50s. Yeah. There was a concerted effort.
I think it was 58.
By the Eisenhower administration to emphasize science education in public schools and colleges because of that.
And there was a STEM movement just a little while ago, which was the same.
There still is, although
but it's a little lopsided. I think the STEM movement is a little lopsided in the science, what is it?
Science, technology, engineering, and math.
That should be the entirety of education.
No, it should be STEAM, include the arts
and humanities, as they used to be called.
Well,
I agree.
And somebody was calling it steamed hams.
But I like that.
Yeah, you need to include the arts and humanities, because otherwise you get Frankenstein. But
you get every mad scientist ever.
Jurassic Park or something like that. But after that, there were attacks on education. And all throughout the 60s and 70s, when you get to Reagan being governor of California, the college system in California was nearly free, nearly cost-free. There was some small fees, but anybody who's capable of getting into college could go. And but students were protesting. And Reagan said, "Why should I pay for students to protest me?" And he eliminated the free college education that people could get, the affordable free college education people could get. And the attack on that, on the affordability of it, I mean, that's one of the things that's been driving the higher education system to be considered almost more vocational training or job training. Right. Because the costs have risen so dramatically.
It has to be looked at as an investment in a lucrative career.
Right.
Because otherwise you can't pay for it.
Right. But a third of that increase in costs has been driven by increased building and amenities on campuses because they're trying to compete with each other for students.
Yeah.
A third of the cost is due to the reduction in state support for higher education. Right. So it has to come from tuition. And a third of the cost, and these are rough percentages, a third of the cost is due to the increased number and compensation of administrators.
Oh, once again, those that can't teach.
Administrate.
Yeah.
So administer.
Administrate. That's a word.
And so, excuse me. But even now we see, as I was saying, attacks on what teachers are allowed to teach, and critical race theory.
this
For
is
example,
this
yeah,
is a
go ahead.
complicated issue.
It is.
Uh, certainly we've seen what I would call the sort of conservative ignoramuses are the ones that are making the most news in school board meetings. And that's kind of a question is school boards were designed to do that, to allow communities to have an input in what the community was teaching. And school boards are elected. And well, in a lot of places, I'm not sure. I don't think it's always the same everywhere.
It's not the same everywhere.
Yeah. But school boards exist so that the community can have some say in the local education system. But it's gotten to the point where, as you put it before we went live, was it's the uneducated deciding what their children are going to be educated or not with.
Yes. And it's become politicized for nefarious purposes, because you have to keep people angry about something. So they'll vote for you if you're angry about the same things.
Right.
Vote for me. I hate the same people you hate.
Yeah.
So critical race theory, which was a theory, a concept taught in law schools,
yes,
was grabbed upon by conservatives to say, who started passing laws about not teaching critical race theory in elementary school and high school,
right. in primary education,
where
yeah.
it never was. But
and without really understanding what critical race theory was, even in practice.
Exactly. Yeah, you ask people what it is, and I'm opposed to it. You don't even know
it's what I think because it's called critical race theory, people think it's critical of white racism. Well, no, that's not exactly it. But why wouldn't you be critical of white racism?
Well, because it's part of several kinds of critical theory. Yes. Critical theory has a meaning. This is critical theory about the institutionalized racism, yes, in structures that are supported in an ongoing way, and it's about systemic racism.
Yeah, right.
Rather than individual bigotry. Well, yeah, of course it is, but every time I hear somebody say, "I'm not a racist, but," you know, what comes after the "but" is going to prove that they are. So, yeah, so there's that, and the the structures of higher education every level of education has some problems, and there are certainly teachers in elementary and high school education who are leaving. They're having trouble finding teachers because parents have been insisting kids have to go back to school in person. Well, okay, there's a reason a lot of parents want their kids back in school, and they're claiming it's because they get a better education. And at certain levels, that's true, levels of education. But there are also parents who can't stay home if their kids are home, or don't have the online means. There's an inequity in that. But they also are not trusting the expertise of the teachers, and they're not concerned about the teachers being safe. Teaching as a profession is underpaid and disregarded until people say, my children are so important and they need an education. So you, teacher, who have chosen this as a profession, don't deserve compensation because you're doing it out of concern for my children. So take what pittance we give you. I've seen plenty of people ignorantly say, well, public school teachers only work 9 months a year and they get the other 3 months off. Well, hello, class preparation, 12-hour days, class preparation, lesson plan preparation, their own ongoing requirements for ongoing education and training. Their
it's not like they
and
get 3 months vacation.
no, and
Yeah.
they also a lot of teachers have second jobs because they have to.
Almost everyone I've ever known.
Yeah, and
well, and then there's the well, so keep kids in school all year. Oh, well, we can't do that. You know, that I think a lot of teachers would be willing to work all year with, you know, an adjusted class.
Yeah, there are some where it's like a 3-week break every 3 months.
Yeah, something like that. And I think that would be a completely reasonable model.
Yeah.
But you know, oh, well, we can't do that. Kids need their time off. They need time to be kids. And like, you can't have it every way. There's got to be, at some point, you've got to decide, okay, what's the most important thing? My child getting an education or me getting free babysitting while I'm at work?
Right.
And that the thing is that, no, I insist that you teach my children for as little as I can possibly get away with teaching you. And here's what I want you to teach them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is where I think the society's responsibility to its population comes in. And this is why I think it's a complex issue, because I don't have any children. I don't have anybody in the school system. That doesn't keep me from going to a school board meeting and arguing about what people should teach. But it's the ultimate argument from a parent to say, well, how dare you come in here and say we should be teaching my children? I said, your children are also my fellow citizens.
Yes.
So I do have some right. How this country moves forward is something I'm invested in, just as much as you are, maybe more, if listening to what you want to teach your children or not.
Yes.
So, but it is a complex issue. You know, how do you stand up and say, well, I don't have any kids in school, but here's what I think they should be taught.
Well, and there are plenty of parents who there's no licensing or qualification or training to be parents.
No, God knows.
And there are plenty of parents who don't understand. They're only interested, is rather harsh, but only interested in turning out clones of themselves.
Right.
And not in helping their children become whatever their children can be, as their children decide.
That kind of,
and that's a lack of humility on the part of the parents.
Oh yeah, lack of courage too.
Yes.
Why,
and a lack of justice also.
Yeah. I don't want my children to grow up to challenge me. Good heavens, I'm not sure I would deal with that. But that also brings me to the idea of charter schools that in Michigan we've had to deal with lately because of Betsy DeVos, who from Michigan, and was
never went to public school, never taught in public school, never
no,
and
became, no educational background at all.
Yes, and became Secretary of Education.
Yep, under guess who?
Yeah, what a travesty.
Yes, yeah, from the very beginning.
Yes,
it was.
Yes,
but here's my. And again, we get back to the sort of defunding of public schools over the last several decades, and how public schools admittedly got bad in some places.
Yes.
Well, impossible to educate in.
Because their funding was based on local property taxes. So
right.
richer areas, more well-to-do areas had better funding for the public schools, and poorer areas had less funding. And attempts to balance that were met with resistance from the wealthier districts saying, I don't want to pay for, I'm here, I want to support my children. I don't want to support someone else's children. And the same people who say there are politicians who ran for president promising to eliminate the Department of Education as a federal department because it's not in the Constitution it should be controlled by the states. Well, one of the things the federal government has a role to play is when the states are unjust in their treatment of their citizens.
Right. Well, and then we get it as a democracy. This is what makes it so complicated. As a democracy, right? Who decides?
Pretty simple to me. Just let me decide.
Well, benevolent dictatorships are extremely efficient in their way of running things.
Yes.
That was non-benevolent dictators are pretty efficient too, but I'm gonna give you the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, thank you. It was a joke, but
Well, but so here we are. Who decides what is just? Well, as a democracy, we decide that collectively.
Yeah.
And if 51% of the people say that 49% of the people, don't get a good education, that's supposed to be the way it works. And that's wrong. I mean,
although
on the face of it, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and the courts could address that and have until there was an attack on the court system. So anyway, higher education has, as I mentioned, problems because of the funding, and so people viewing it as job training. And that's a problem because it was supposed to be a place for exploring what you were going to do and why, and learning a lot about a lot of things. A very broad-based education, the classic trivium and quadrivium.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not necessarily advocating going back to Latin and Greek, but understanding one of the principles I tell my students is the more you know, the more you become able to know. And the more you do, the more you become able to do. And having a broad base of knowledge in a lot of areas makes you better able to combine content from
to synergize
different area, in new ways, and be creative in that way by combining things in a new way. And the synergy of that is, there was a great series years ago. I'm trying to remember who created this series on PBS, but he'd start with one thing and show how this one thing led to something else, and then was combined with another thing, and then you have this other thing. And I remember the one with the thermos bottle and eventually rocketry. And because it's the multidisciplinary areas, that often lead to breakthroughs, because people dive very deep in one area, but that can also be a kind of blinders. It's necessary, but you also have to have people who Buckminster Fuller referred to as multi-specialists, not necessarily generalists, but multi-specialists in a lot of different areas where they could do things. And you look at his work, and that was absolutely an example of that.
Right. Well, and then you've got and the arts. We can't. That's certainly true for technology, multi-specializing and absolute specializing being used to advance technology. But the arts and philosophy are also important in advancing humanity's presence in the universe.
Music education increases overall test scores in all subject areas.
Really? I was not aware of that.
Yes.
It makes some sense.
It does. And
if you understand music, you understand to some extent math.
Yeah. Well, and I've explained to people before that there's something in music, learning to read and play music, that is similar to one of the things you get in cursive handwriting. In that you're doing one thing, like you're looking at this note, playing this note, but you're also having to consider the next note to change the fingering to move into that at the same time. In cursive handwriting, you're forming this letter, but depending on the next letter to come, you have to change the exit of this letter
Yes.
to move into the next letter. So it's a very similar thing, and it's not simply motor skills. It is that too, but it's that doing and anticipating. It's a building mental pathways that effectively in ways that in a very effective way, very efficient.
That's interesting. I've not heard that theory for the value of cursive writing, but it's interesting.
Yeah.
I have terrible cursive. I got great grades in it when it was important. After that, my handwriting deteriorated, and now I mostly print because it's easier for other people to read.
Yeah. Well, and if I'm taking notes in cursive and I don't transcribe them right away, sometimes because the faster I go, the more it approaches just a squiggly line.
Right. So. And my mother, it was important to my mother that I had good handwriting, and she had magnificent, beautiful handwriting.
My mother did too. I think it was a certain. I was just looking at someone's mother's handwriting, Elsa's mother's handwriting, and some recipes, and it was very similar to my mother's handwriting because it was a certain style that was taught.
Well, and I think a bigger part of the curriculum,
yes,
maybe
penmanship.
Yes, exactly. Penmanship. Yeah. So getting back to charter schools, and my problem with charter schools, and in particular religious charter schools, and I understand I had a very short conversation about this with a mutual friend of ours, and insisted that he was going to spend the extra money to send his kid to a charter school because he knew they would get a better education there. And that's legitimate. I think that's,
except the results are not borne that out.
Well,
depends on the school, but
he was also also had, I think, legitimate concerns for his child's safety in their local public school. Okay, so that's a problem with the funding. That's all a problem with funding.
Right.
So you've got to sympathize with a parent who believes that. But my worry is that charter schools, and like I said, particularly religious charter schools, are a foundational indoctrination system.
Well, and I think that while parents certainly have the right to send their children to religious schools, those religious schools should not get state funding.
Okay, and that's kind of where the sort of compromise position from completely abolishing them to saying that they're just as valid is that they, as it has been for most of our lives, at least, private schools and religious schools did not get public funding.
Except they are
now.
Yes,
they weren't when we were growing up.
They should not.
No, because
further, I think that religious schools should meet the same requirements for teacher certification, for curriculum that public schools have to meet.
Well,
the religion is in the religious education component is in addition to what everything else the students need to get.
And I would agree with that, because at least we used to say that this level of education is compulsory.
Yes.
Every child has to have this base education before they're allowed to, enter the workforce and be an adult, right? So yes, if a religious school is touting itself as a substitute for a public school, it must meet that baseline.
Right.
And then add whatever indoctrination it wants on top of that.
Right.
But
and not get public funding for doing that.
And not get public funding. Because they are being supported, they have a support system, the church that sponsors it.
Yes.
That public schools do not have.
And I think there's also homeschooling. And
that's
people who do homeschooling have to meet certain requirements.
Yes.
Legally.
Yes, they do.
But that depends on the state they're in.
Yes, it does. And it also depends on how much oversight there is. And
exactly.
And to me, this and my wife's children are homeschooled, and up until her first two were homeschooled mostly. They all entered the public school system at one point. Basically, when she had to return to work after a divorce, they went back to public school. And her youngest daughter is, I hate to say it because they're all fantastic people and were great kids. That the oldest is the most of a loner, and the youngest is the most socialized. And it has a direct correlation to how long they were in public school. And that's, good or bad. It had little to do. Tracy was very good about educating them.
Yeah.
I don't trust every homeschooler to be as fair and balanced as she was about exposing them to new and different ideas.
I had a student I was talking about, actually about conclusions versus opinions and evidence and data, and used as an example flat earthers. And one student said, I said something like when I say dinosaurs, and evidence for it, and old earth, flat earth, dinosaurs. And one student said, oh, my family doesn't believe in dinosaurs. They think the earth is only 10,000 years old. They don't believe it's flat, but they don't think there were ever dinosaurs, and they think the earth is very young. I said, well,
dinosaurs are an invention of,
yeah.
For what purpose?
That was unclear, and I didn't want to belabor the point and get sidetracked into a discussion about that. I said, well, that's they're wrong.
Yeah.
And I said, they're wrong. People are wrong about things. She said, yeah, I don't think they're right either, but I don't think we ever landed on the moon, the student says. And I said, well, would it make a difference to you? Would any evidence I presented to you proving, for example, that we didn't have the technology to fake the moon landing in 1969,
right,
that it would have cost more to invent and build the technology to fake the moon landing film than it did to actually go to the moon? Would any evidence I presented to you of that, and I have plenty, would that make a difference? And she said no. And I said, well, then we have no basis for discussion. And I moved off because I didn't want the other students.
You have a responsibility to the rest of your class.
Right. And the other students were starting to laugh at her. And I didn't want to do that because they still had to work together and on their work, and I still had to move the class forward. But there are it's another quotation, and I apologize for not having remembering who this is, that the people who are the who are the stupid people are absolutely sure of what they believe,
Oh,
and the smart people are the ones who are full of doubt.
right.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, or humility, right? It's like you,
it is. Yeah,
the
it
opposite
is.
of the Dunning-Krugers. I recognize that I don't know everything. And that makes me vulnerable in an argument to someone who insists and is absolutely positive that they do know everything.
Right. And I often think of that, though, as analogous to I don't have to outrun the bear, I just have to outrun you.
Yeah,
I don't have to know everything, but I know more than you do. And
right.
what does that say about you? That, and I mean, not you,
But
I mean,
I know, but
yeah,
somebody like that simply does not recognize your greater breadth of knowledge or depth of knowledge, for that matter. I
yes.
mean, that's the thing.
Or
They're absolutely invulnerable to argument, because nothing you say will dislodge the ridiculous notion that they have, that has taken root in their brain.
the or they disdain education.
Oh, well, yeah. And that's been a thread through American history since forever.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was
We don't need that book Larnin.
as a kid in elementary school, I was mocked for being a bookworm,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Yeah. Well, it's still kind of an epithet, right?
it
I
sure
mean,
is. Yeah.
there's people who have taken it upon, have taken it up as a badge. Absolutely, I'm a bookworm, you know.
Well, and we were in Atlanta. We were in a restaurant in Midtown Atlanta, and I there was a group of young guys from outside the perimeter, I think, at another table being very loud in their and boisterous about their particular conservative philosophies. And I turned around and glanced at them because I didn't know if they were talking like a bunch of old guys, and I wanted to see who it was, and it was a bunch of young guys. I
Right.
turned around and looked, and one of them said, "What are you looking at, you dirty, long-haired hippie? You probably went to college." meaning going to college is an insult.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. In their eyes, it completely undermines your credibility.
And I just turned around and went back to dinner.
Right. Just as well.
I figured I could have taken out two and hurt the third one bad, but the fourth one probably would have gotten to me. So
yeah, maybe. Yeah, we're not all Jason Statham.
yeah. So, but then I'd have to pay for damage in the restaurant. So
probably, but that's like the ultimate flex, right? You take out 3 or 4 guys, and then you throw $100 on the bar and say, for the damages,
right,
and then you walk out.
Well, I did like, as much as I didn't care for the self-casting of Tom Cruise in the Jack Reacher story, there is a fight scene.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I know the place where it was filmed because we used to live in Pittsburgh, and I know exactly where they were filming it. Been there in that strip district, that area many times. And there are 5 guys, and he says, it says 3 against 1.
Once I take out the leader,
yeah, and then
I have to deal with 1 loyal wingman, maybe 2, and you 2 will run away.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened. Yeah. I am looking forward to seeing the new series.
We're I'd love to have this conversation with you, but we are wandering well off of our topic.
Oh yes, we are.
We may be ignoring our listeners at this point.
So oh yeah, we have people who listen to this.
Yeah, all of you 30 out there, we appreciate you.
So I think we haven't really talked much about self-directed learning.
No. But
And
maybe we can do that in another. We
yeah,
talked about society's responsibility. Maybe we can talk about personal responsibility in another episode.
yeah.
We've already gone 45 minutes.
Okay. Well, I think then maybe we're at a good point to conclude because my glass is empty anyway. So,
Yeah, mine too. So everybody out there, like, share, subscribe, do all the things that everybody's like to do. We're not making a living at this, and Joe's about to retire, so we need to get we need to monetize this somehow.
and
He's
please
not sleeping on my couch.
suggestions, please, for topics you'd like to hear us pontificate
Yes,
about.
I'm pretty sure that we have discussed every single suggested topic.
Yes, I think so. So
that's not a guarantee, but it's a pretty good bet.
yeah. So thank you, and we'll see you again. And until then, be thou
a good night
and true.